Gentleman yields back. Ms. Bush. I said Ms. Bush.
St. Louis, and I thank you, Chairman Nadler, for convening this hearing. The secrecy surrounding the issuance of the electronic surveillance and accompanying gag orders is deeply concerning, and in many ways, every actor is implicated, from the Department of Justice, which in this case has abdicated its role to uphold constitutional protections, to the private companies that followed the department's orders without any transparency, to the legislators who have thrown their hands up and allowed the DOJ to transgress without any accountability and transparency. While it is shocking to hear that the DOJ was engaging in such surveillance practices against government officials, their staffers, and their families, it is not an anomaly. As a protester and activist, I know firsthand how invasive law enforcement surveillance can be. It's for this reason that I have been vocal in my opposition to DOJ's blanket ability to surveil all Americans, especially Black and Brown protesters who have been sounding the alarm on this issue. The department's ability to surveil Americans exercising their First Amendment right to protest has built the infrastructure that has now allowed the department to surveil members of this body. Companies like Apple and others are then left to hand over the records at their disposal, betraying the trust of the people who use their products. In this instance, Apple complied with the DOJ, demonstrating the thorny position of tech companies, balancing their customers' private online activity with legitimate requests from this country's chief law enforcement agency. Mr. Byrd, it has been reported that some data hosts or providers have challenged the government's electronic surveillance orders and the gag orders. However, the company's ability to challenge the orders is limited and it is not assured. Mr. Byrd, how does the abuse of secrecy orders affect investigations against Black and Brown communities?
Well, I think as you point out, you always have to be aware of the fact that government as a majority institution can sometimes disproportionately affect those in minority positions or who have less representation. And therefore, our Constitution and the constitutional rights on which our country is founded are designed to protect those minority interests and those minority rights, especially. And that's why when you have a law enforcement agency that's able to act secretly without creating the adequate record to be able to challenge and review those secrecy orders and understand the basis for them and to ensure that they're only issued when absolutely essential in the national interest, there is almost certainly going to be disproportionate impact of that secrecy.
Thank you. Can you tell me, how do you decide which orders to challenge?
Unfortunately, in most cases, we don't know enough because we are provided so little information. We don't know enough to even know when we have an opportunity to challenge. We challenge those that on their face are inadequate or clearly not legal. And in most cases, we find prosecutors then agree and withdraw that. And that's a big percentage that we challenge. We also challenge those that for other reasons we think we can negotiate a different approach by the law enforcement agency. But then we have to look at those relatively rare instances when we know enough or we can discern enough to know that we have a factual basis for litigating the scope of a secrecy order. And that, unfortunately, is too rare. And that's another reason why deferring this to the private sector, to the cloud providers, is not a workable solution. It's why we need to have a legislative solution that creates a greater burden on law enforcement and imposes on the judiciary the obligation to ensure that appropriate standards are met and a record of that is maintained.
Okay. So also considering the sheer volume of orders a provider like Microsoft can receive, how burdensome is it to require providers to determine if and when each order merits a challenge? Tell us about that.
Well, I was asked that question earlier, and I don't have specific data that I can provide about the nature of that burden. We take it very seriously. We have a very large team that's devoted to this effort and that is constantly looking at how we can best protect our customers' rights and interests. And so it's a significant investment by Microsoft in doing this work. And I think the point for the committee, though, is not about the burden on Microsoft. No one is going to be too sympathetic to the fact that my company has to spend money on this problem. The problem is you should not be deferring to the private sector that responsibility, because it could vary from company to company how seriously they take this. And we have only limited visibility and limited legal rights to challenge these secrecy orders. We explore those rights as much as we can. You can't count on every provider doing that to the same degree or to the same extent. And that's not where enforceability of these important rights should rest.
The gentlelady's time